Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the essay discussions. We've got our second interview today. It's also with Mike Wallace, as was the interview with Aldous Huxley. And today we're going to be looking at an interview that he had with Ayan Rand from 1959. Joining me today, I've got a pair of usuals. I've got Brandig.
Good afternoon from Texas.
And Freelance.
Good afternoon from Old Zealand, or actually good evening.
And a rebranded Freelance. What is that?
Well, I'm using just rigged hardware, so I couldn't find my original avatar. So.
Okay, so is there anything to say before we go into the actual conversation? Any notes on Rand or on objectivism, or do you want to just go straight into the interview and take her from her own mouth?
As far as I remember from this interview, Rand actually explains what her views are and what objectivism is, so I think we can take it from there.
Yeah. Okay, let's go straight into it.
Off blast.
Take two. That implies there was a take one that was left on the scrap floor.
I also love the title card. It's just awkwardly wobbly.
This is Mike Wallace with another television portrait from our gallery of colorful people. Throughout the United States, small pockets of intellectuals have become involved in a new and unusual philosophy which would seem to strike at the very roots of our society. The fountainhead of this philosophy is a novelist, Ayan Rand, whose two major works, The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged, have been bestsellers. We'll try to find out more about her revolutionary creed and about Miss Rand herself in just a moment. And now to our story. Down through history, various political and philosophical movements have sprung up, but most of them have died. Some, however, like democracy or communism, take hold and affect the entire world. Here in the United States, perhaps the most challenging and unusual new philosophy has been forged by a novelist, Ayan Rand. Miss Rand's point of view.
Yes, Albion? Is there a reason you paused it? Or it's entirely possible we've lost the Albion.
Oh, in that case, we can take over the stream.
I am here.
Oh, crap.
First time for everything. I forgot to unmute myself. I just love this introduction. The first image that we see of Rand. There's something quite maniacal about those eyes.
Well, she's not shot very well, and the lighting doesn't flatter her particularly. She wasn't a particularly attractive woman, period. But this is very unflattering.
Yes, and I mean, just from the get-go, to compare it to the interview that Mike Wallace did with Huxley, I think as we go through, we'll see that his interview style is a little bit more aggressive. Although she is quite a confrontational woman as well, so the rapport is definitely not as amicable as it was with Huxley. But I do think that part of it comes from Wallace wanting to take down the ideology more than he felt with Huxley.
Still comparatively unknown in America, but if it ever did take hold, it would revolutionize our lives. And Ayan, to begin with, I wonder if I can ask you to capsulize. I know this is difficult. Can I ask you to capsulize your philosophy? What is Randism?
First of all, I do not call it Randism, and I don't like that name. I call it objectivism.
All right.
Meaning a philosophy based on objective reality. Now, let me explain it as briefly as I can. First, my philosophy is based on the concept that reality exists as an objective absolute. That man's mind, reason, is his means of perceiving it. And that man needs a rational morality. I am primarily the creator of a new code of morality, which has so far been believed impossible, namely, a morality not based on faith,
On faith.
not on faith, not on arbitrary whim, not on emotion, not on arbitrary edict, mystical or social, but on reason, a morality which can be proved by means of logic, which can be demonstrated to be true and necessary.
All right. All right.
Now, may I define what my morality is?
All right.
Because this is merely an introduction. My morality is based on man's life as a standard of value. And since man's mind is his basic means of survival, I hold that if man wants to live on earth and to live as a human being, he has to hold reason as an absolute, by which I mean that he has to hold reason as his only guide to action, and that he must live by the independent judgment of his own mind, that his highest moral purpose is the achievement of his own happiness.
Well, that's
So-
a bunch of loaded statements, if there ever were any.
Yeah, let's take some time to delve into that.
Well, if I can summarize it, basically, she wants to introduce volcanism, which we know from Star Trek. So emotions are secondary to logic and reason.
That if we're going to talk about the Vulcan philosophy, one of the core tenets of objectivism is inherently incompatible with it, because the one of the tenets of the Vulcan philosophy is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one.
Yeah, I know.
is diametrically opposed to the core principle.
And enough about
objectivism.
Star Trek too. But
I do
yeah,
find it strange that at the very end, though, she does phrase it as, each individual man seeking their own happiness, because obviously any ideology that uses happiness as the basis for human existence sounds utilitarian or in some way, which is obviously not objectivism at all.
well, it's a very individualistic system she's proposing.
Mhm.
Nowhere
Yeah.
does she say that there's a form of cooperation, and certainly not the way that communism would phrase it, where now I'm stuck with the needs of the many, but for the from those
To each according to his ability, to each according to their need.
according to his, it's so asinine that I can't even remember it. But she basically says, well, each person should try to optimize their own situation, so it's very pointed to action from the individual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what I get.
We see that explained a little bit more in I think the next section. There's a strong strain of self-empowerment and self-improvement in objectivism.
Well, on that note about the reference to objectivism, I find it difficult to believe that Mike Wallace was unaware that the appropriate name for the philosophy was objectivism prior to his asking this question. So he's immediately set up Rand, either intentionally on his part or because she asked him to immediately correct him and essentially start the interview off on an adversarial basis rather than collegially.
Yeah, as you say, it's either adversarial or, which I hadn't thought about, she's set it up as if it was being used quite often, the term Randyism was being used quite a lot, and she was trying to stray away from that. It could be a setup of use that term so that I can instantly dispel it, and kind of assert that it's objectivism as opposed to Randianism.
And one of the things that we're going to discover throughout this, and Rand leads off with this, is the number of smuggled premises she uses on which to base her philosophy. The core component being man needs to rely on his mind to live, which is fundamentally untrue in a lot of cases. There are a lot of people who don't think and survive quite well. Mm-hmm. And secondly, she even qualifies that further by saying to live as a man, which, if there is any definition with wiggle room, that is it. That and her, core value of happiness as defined by the individual.
It becomes circular, as it is that a man can only live as a man if he lives as a man. So yes, I guess so. But,
and I'm not a fatalist with history, but I do think that, as we'll see, there's a certain arrogance, in my opinion, that we find with objectivism, that you see with any kind of rationalist philosophy, because rationalism, for the most part, assumes that they have all the information that they need to know what the objective framework is. And I do think that it's an inherently modernist worldview. We wouldn't have really seen it come about at any other time period other than the turn of the 20th century.
There's also... Oh, no, go ahead, Bishop.
No, if you look at from a modern, well, not a modernist point of view, but from what we know about psychology nowadays, we actually know that the rational mind is actually guided by the subconscious mind. As Jonathan Haidt would call it, the elephant and the rider. So the rider can only see what it's shown by the elephant by leaning a certain way, and from her point of view, this elephant wouldn't exist because the rider would be in control of everything. The rational mind, the mind is supreme.
Yeah, one of the core tenets of the philosophy is, as she just stated, I have definitively proven X, Y, and Z. So there's definitely a significant level of hubris associated with objectivism and objectivists as a rule. And additionally, there's complete and total disregard for intuition, emotion, and non-rational desire, which were all elements that she identified in her introduction and completely immediately discarded as being without value or irrelevant.
Yeah. And I think, I'll be honest, I think all the arguments that we brought forwards are better than most that Mike Wallace puts forwards, because a lot of those are not philosophical challenges, but like political challenges, pragmatist, or socialist arguments against it. It's you can see the background from which he's drawing these questions.
Well, we're attacking it from a philosophical perspective, so we don't need to worry about the implementation as long as we can identify that the theory is impractical. Whereas Mike Wallace being, and this is possibly me not making assumptions about him, but it seems that he is much more in line with Huxley in that he believes that there's a certain rationalism that can be utilized to identify a proper way of organizing society. And he just rejects that Rand's view and objectivism is not that mechanism. Therefore, he has to attack it from a practical implementation standpoint rather than the philosophical underpinnings.
Well, it's either that or he knows the position that the audience is viewing it from, and they're not going to challenge it on more philosophical grounds. They're going to be more interested in this, why are you removing my social safety net sort of position. Should we carry on?
Yep.
Indeed.
And that he must not force other people, nor accept their right to force him. That each man must live as an end in himself and follow his own rational self-interest.
May I interrupt now?
You may.
Because you put this philosophy to work in your novel Atlas Shrugged.
That's right.
You demonstrate it in human terms in your novel Atlas Shrugged. And let me start by quoting from a review of this novel Atlas Shrugged that appeared in Newsweek. It said that you are out to destroy almost every edifice in the contemporary American way of life, our Judeo-Christian religion, our modified government-regulated capitalism, our rule by the majority will. Other reviews have said that you scorn churches and the concept of God. Are these accurate criticisms?
Yes, I agree with the fact, but not with this criticism. Namely, if I am challenging the base of all these institutions. I'm challenging the moral code of altruism, the precept that man's moral duty is to live for others, that man must sacrifice himself to others, which is the present day morality.
What do you mean by sacrifice himself for others? Now we're getting to the point.
One moment. Since I'm challenging the base, I necessarily would challenge the institutions, you named, which are a result of that morality.
All right.
You do have to appreciate that she is one of the first people I know of that embraced the Chad. Yes.
Oh, may I interrupt you? Yes, you may.
Yes. So, what do we think about this negation of human self-sacrifice?
Well, she's consistent as far as she goes. That's one of the great praises I have for her and her writings is she doesn't tend to contradict her premises. So she adheres to, at least in her rhetoric, the positions she espouses and the premises on which she makes her arguments. It's just I've found that her premises are flawed.
Yes, yeah. It's funny because actually there's a sort of synthesis that you could see now in the Dawkins, everything being, any form of altruism is self-motivated, sort of hybridization of the idea that objectivists could be selfish, but on the understanding that any of their selfish actions are, any of their selfless actions are selfish. I don't know. It just sprung to mind when I first watched this.
What I also found funny is that the critique that she gets on her book is almost what Howard Roark gets on his work. Like
yes,
he's being told that basically his architecture is destroying architecture, and
that's the criticism
challenging the establishment.
Yeah, that's the criticism she lays against her protagonists in most of her works, and you can see the echoes of it in the actual criticism of the work itself.
Mm-hmm.
She kind of expects this criticism, so she doesn't. She kind of like, okay, yeah, that's what people do because of their reasons. They don't like it. They see it as something that challenges their status quo that they benefit from. So that kind of critique doesn't hurt her.
I think she kind of enjoys that critique against it because she, as you say, that she views herself as being that character in her works, and so to go out onto an interview and then get labeled with the same criticisms, I think she probably sees it as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
Well,
she's doing her work.
She's borrowing an aphorism from the Air Force in that you only take fire when you're over the target grid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
And now what is self-sacrifice?
Yes, what is self-sacrifice? You say that you do not like the altruism by which we live. You like a certain
look at those eyes.
And this selfishness.
Yes.
I would say that I don't like is too weak a word. I consider it evil. And self-sacrifice is,
do you know what
men need?
I got reminded, those eyes I've seen before in Stefan Molyneux. I didn't used to watch many of his videos, but there's just a certain, I don't know, manic ideology behind them. You know.
No, it's also she's not retelling a script. She's really thinking about what she's hearing, and she's constructing an answer while she's listening, and that's why her eyes are moving like that.
Oh, so you can tell that she's very intelligent in the direction of them, but there's a certain intensity in them that you don't really see in many people.
Oh, you can also see it from the way that she's sitting. She's sitting there like she's not relaxed. She's leaning on one side. She's really, really tense. Mm-hmm. And so she almost looks like some animal that's ready to jump out and claw at Mike Wallace. And that's why this while if you look at Huxley during his interview, he's sitting back and he's relaxed and he's talking slowly and relaxed, and she's really tense. And this intensity just radiates out. even through this black and white.
We're slowly turning this channel from reviewing the content of the words to charisma on command.
Well, it's not just a charismatic criticism. This is the human behavior when you have someone who is aware and anticipating a challenge to a core belief they hold.
Mm-hmm.
This is a true believer defending their belief against someone who's going to basically reject it.
Mm-hmm.
And by rejecting that core belief, they're rejecting their identity. They are fundamentally attacking the core of that persona. You mentioned Molyneux. Molyneux as well said in almost the same terms that he finally has solved a problem presented to philosophers for thousands of years, in that he's based a morality exclusively and entirely on reason. He's equally flawed in his premises,
mm-hmm.
but that doesn't discount the position that he's staked and the weight he's laid and the amount of his personality and his identity he's poured into those assertions, just as Rand has done with objectivism.
No, I agree. It's not inherently bad to have that sort of intensity, but a lot of snake oil salesmen have that sort of expression, in my experience. I'm not saying that she is, but when we're looking at someone like Molyneux, you just kind of get that sort of that same vibe. Maybe it's just me, but there's a certain energy that you can pick up of people, and a lot of the time it's put on as a way of expressing their intensity, but it's falsehood. I don't think it is with Rand.
To serve others in order to justify his existence, that his moral duty is to serve others. That is what most people believe today.
Well, yes, we're taught to feel concerned for our fellow man, to feel responsible for his welfare, to feel that we are, as religious people might put it, children under God and responsible one for the other. Now, why do you rebel? What's wrong with this philosophy?
But that is what, in fact, makes man a sacrificial animal. That man must work for others, concern himself with others, or be responsible for them. That is the role of a sacrificial object. I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy. And nor should he wish to sacrifice himself for the happiness of others. I hold that man should have self-esteem.
And cannot man have self-esteem if he loves his fellow man? What's wrong with loving your fellow man? Christ, every moral leader in man's history, has
this entire train of thought and the contention that Rand puts forward about the man as a self-sacrificial animal and the man as a being who is yoked to his fellow man is not accurate at all. There are elements within society, specifically the communists, socialists, etc., who believe that man has a duty to others, but one of the core elements that has been shown through modern society for certain, and through technology specifically, is there can be interdependence between men that is not necessarily slavery. So the classic eye pencil, the long supply chains and the roundabout production methods. There's massive interdependence between and among men, so that we do rely on one another to uphold their end of the bargain. But in general, that is a consensual agreement. That is not anything that is coercively imposed on one another.
There's a benefit in working together. So apes together strong is a tenet that works. So, but I guess that Rand is a somebody who has a very strong sense of individuality. She needs to be a person, and she needs to do everything, and to be almost like in control of everything. And so for her to rely on other people is something that probably feels, I think, would be something she would consider bad. And that's why she wants to have this independence. But not everybody is the same. So I think she's kind of an outlier, and that her personality kind of drives her towards this, but it doesn't fit on the rest of society.
Yes, there's a whiff of egalitarianism in the sense that there's not a recognition that some people are going to be leaders and some people are going to fall more into the category of being sheep. I think that Rand pictures a world in which every man is the heroic man that will, take the bull by the horns and manifest his own destiny. But I don't see that as being true.
Well, if you look at the Fountainhead, there is a passage where Howard Rourke receives a client and she wants to have a house. And from the moment that she says, well, I want to have it in a certain style, that Rourke disagrees with, because Rourke only makes buildings that he likes.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the way that she's described is that her face turns into this shapeless oval, or this blank oval, and she stops being a person. So I think from Rand's point of view, is that you can only be a person if you actually achieve this independence, and otherwise you are not a person. You're like a sacrificial object, a slave, as it is.
And that's the one of the core elements of her philosophy, is that independence, that rejection of the desires and guidance and opinions of others, is the core of living as a man, as she smuggled in one of her first premises. She says that man must be able to stand on his own, and man must be able to attempt to achieve his own aims in the absence or even in contradiction to other men. That's core to Rourke, that's core to John Galt, that's core to all of her characters, even the guy from Anthem, whose name escapes me at the moment.
I'm not familiar, so I'm not sure. But yeah, no, I agree. Okay. Anything else to cover, or should we carry on?
Well, just that this anti-sacrifice, anti-altruism is one of the core tenets of objectivism, and we can see she'll keep coming back to this over and over throughout this interview.
Yes, well, her non-fiction book was called "Selfishness as a Virtue" or something along those lines.
The virtue of selfishness.
The virtue, yeah. Sorry, the other way around. So yeah, I mean, she's not exactly hiding the fact that it's a core tenet of objectivism. And as disdainful as I find most of his writing now, Christopher Hitchens did have a little witticism about it, saying that he finds it adorable that there's a movement in which Americans feel that they need to be even more selfish. So, I think this is the largest divide, is that you can recognize the innate selfishness of man and understand that it's in human nature. But then it's how you react to that. And obviously with Rand, it's a glorification of that fact. But to me, it's an understanding of it, a recognition of it when it comes to the hierarchies that are built, that it's always going to be found within it. But you shouldn't be indulging in it. It's not necessarily, man is born in sin, regardless of whether or not you follow the any religion or not. I think a lot of us can still agree with that. So maybe glorifying selfishness is not a good way to get a productive society.
Well, it goes back to the core Aristotelian and Aurelian virtues and vices. All a vice is a virtue taken too far. And
yes,
a virtue is a vice that is only indulged with sparingly.
Yes. I found it very interesting. We'll come to it in a moment. I'll play it just one moment. She says that Aristotle is her only philosophical inspiration, which I found to be quite a surprise, because obviously a lot of people draw comparisons to Nietzsche.
Yeah, we can revisit that at that point, because that is a very important element.
Yeah, let's carry on. I think it's not too far off. So,
Taught us that we should love one another. Why then is this kind of love, in your mind, immoral?
It is immoral if it is a love placed above oneself. It is more than immoral, it's impossible. Because when you are asked to love everybody indiscriminately, that is, to love people without any standard, to love them regardless of the fact of whether they have any value or virtue, you are asked to love nobody.
But in a sense, in your book, you talk about love as if it were a business deal of some kind. Isn't the essence of love that it is above self-interest?
I just want to go back to what Mike was. Look at his position right there. Look at how he's holding himself.
Of some kind. Isn't the essence of
that body position, it shows how, with how little sincerity and how little seriousness he's taking her.
Yeah, it's pretty rude posturing. It's just a completely dismissive way of engaging with someone.
I'm sure he's trying to project a calming and a relaxed posture, but the body language just says exactly how little he thinks of not only her but her ideas.
I mean, if we're going into armchair body language analysis, then what I do find interesting is the fact that they're actually both lent the same way, which you'd imagine if they were in conflict, then Rand would be in the opposing side. But it seems like they're trying to pair up their body language. So maybe there's some engagement there.
I'm just really interested in take one right now. I really wonder what happened back then.
Yes, this was take two.
There was a different interviewer, but sadly he was killed during the interview. So they had
to put the makeup on for his black eye.
Yeah.
Well, you can see that Rand was leaning to her left throughout the entire interview, and if we jump back to earlier scenes where Mike Wallace, he's mirroring her, not the other way around.
Yeah. So he's trying to be engaging, but that arm sums up his thoughts.
Yeah. I just thought that was worth mentioning, because it demonstrates the tension and the conflict that is the subtext of the entirety of the interview.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays it wouldn't happen because they would record the interviewee separate from the interviewer.
Sorry, say that again. I pressed play.
Nowadays, this you wouldn't see this much tension between them, because they would just first record one person, and then Mike Wallace would come back later, and then with a stand and record all his questions.
Yeah, well, you've got an over-the-shoulder shot, which you don't really see in in any TV interviews now, because you can't do that. You can't go back and edit it. So I suppose it's a more honest way of filming.
They had to do it live, and they had just recorded the not separate cameras, but just the TV output back then. Mm-hmm. That's how they made television. So yeah, it has this more lively style of interviewing, which you don't see anymore.
And cameras were expensive, so they didn't have the 6 or 7 cameras modern sets use as a matter of course.
Yeah.
Well, let me make it concrete for you. What would it mean to have love above self-interest? It would mean, for instance, that a husband would tell his wife, if he were moral, according to the conventional morality, that I am marrying you just for your own sake. I have no personal interest in it, but I am so unselfish that I am marrying you only for your own good.
Well, should husbands and wives
would any woman like that?
Should husbands and wives tally up at the end of the day and say, well, now wait a minute, I love her if she's done enough for me today, or she loves me if I have properly performed my functions?
No, you misunderstood me. That is not how love should be treated. I agree with you that it should be treated like a business deal, but every business has to have its own terms and its own kind of currency. And in love, the currency is virtue. You love people, not for what you do for them or what they do for you. You love them for their values.
So I understand what she's getting at here, but I think that trying to put this transactional framework over all human interaction can be tenuous. Because it might be part of it, but I think that some acts go above and beyond that.
Well, again, it's the assertion of the value hierarchy and Rand's position that nothing can be above you in the value hierarchy, which is just clearly not the case. In fact, a lot of people view the actual placement of certain things above yourself in the value hierarchy as a form of virtue. In fact, Rand herself does this. She said that there are things to which she is willing to subject herself in order to reach a higher virtue.
Yeah, well, that's why it's so strange, because she's saying that selfishness is the virtue, but in the passage that she just said there, she's saying that in a relationship, in a romantic relationship, the currency is virtue. But if selfishness is the virtue, then what does that mean? It's a bit confused.
She's going to get into this later about her own personal relationship, which we can touch on at that point.
Yes, yeah.
The virtues which they have achieved in their own character. You don't love causelessly. You don't love everybody indiscriminately. You love only those who deserve it.
And then if a man is weak or a woman is weak, then he is beyond love?
He certainly does not deserve it. He certainly is beyond. He can always correct it. Man has free will. If a man wants love, he should.
This is when Rand turns into the Red Skull.
Yeah. This is the core of the self-improvement philosophy, and it's right as far as it goes. But the problem is Rand, like others of her ilk, sets the bar so high it's fundamentally unachievable for the vast majority of humans.
It also creates a trap, because if you are unloved or are failing, and it might not be your fault, because it's not always your fault that this happens. And she basically says,
well,
this
it
happens,
usually
and
is.
it's, well,
was that unfair?
But luck is also a factor. But then
I agree.
You can get into this cycle where you basically have to conclude that you're a failure because you're unloved. Well, actually, you might just have been unlucky not meeting somebody, for example. Or
all luck is opportunity meeting preparation.
And iterations, yeah. But she puts the onus of this completely at the individual.
Yes.
And so that this might lead to a situation where, due to no fault of yourself, you might lead to the conclusion that you're doing something wrong, and she does not take this into account.
And one of the things that she does bring up, not in this interview, but in some of her other works, is the constant hypergamy. This is especially it's partially in Fountainhead, but it's very strongly echoed in Atlas Shrugged, in that one will discard the less virtuous in favor of the more virtuous. So even if you've managed to become virtuous enough to win someone's love or be worthy of someone's love, that person can completely and totally and morally, in Rand's view, discard you in favor of someone who's more virtuous.
Yeah. Again, it's why I think that this framework of transactional relationships is incorrect and is damaging if you take it to that kind of if, as you say, if you come across someone that is more virtuous and suits you better, or at least has the potential to, then in theory, there's no reason why you shouldn't just trade in for a younger model.
In fact, you're morally obligated to do so.
Yeah,
which is not a recipe for emotionally stable or happy people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hate to Helen Lovejoy it, but think of the children in this kind of situation. It sounds a bit ridiculous, but what is the family structure in an objective objectivist society?
Are there any children in her novels? I haven't seen any.
There are children in Atlas Shrugged, but they don't show up till very late in the novel, and there's just one singular example of them.
Did she have children herself?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I can't imagine she did.
We can get more into her personal relationships when that time comes.
Yeah, let's carry on.
And he may deserve it, but he cannot expect the unearned, neither in love nor in money, neither in matter nor spirit.
You have lived in our world, and you recognize the fallibility of human beings. There are very few of us, then, in this world, by your standards, who are worthy of love.
Unfortunately, yes, very few. But it is open to everybody to make themselves worthy of it, and that is all that my morality offers them.
If they will
a way to make themselves worthy of love, although that's not the primary motive.
Let's move ahead. How does your philosophy translate itself into the world of politics? Now, one of the principal achievements of this country in the past 20 years particularly, I think most people agree, is the...
Now, if we bounce back and we look at
that shift. Look at that shift.
Exactly. I was just going to mention the body position that she thought she was relaying some massive revelation on him, and she thought she was getting the better of the engagement there, and that's why she was relaxed and composed and leaning back, and now she's coming back into ready to engage the next volley.
Yes,
and she also has her hand underneath her chin like he had. So yeah, he's really mimicking her.
Yeah. Well, no, at this stage, she's mimicking him, but I don't think it's to try and be more engaging. I think that they're just confrontational now.
The stare down.
Yes, which I know who I put my money on with those eyes.
Yeah.
now.
Of social protective legislation based on the principle that we are our brother's keepers. How do you feel about the political trends of the United States, the Western world?
The way everybody feels, except more consciously. I feel that it is terrible, that you see destruction all around you, and that you are moving toward disaster until and unless all those welfare state conceptions have been reversed and rejected. It is precisely these trends which are bringing the world to disaster, because we are now moving towards complete collectivism or socialism, a system under which everybody is enslaved to everybody. And we are moving that way only because of our altruist morality.
Yes, but you say everybody is enslaved to everybody. Yet this came about democratically. The free people in a free country voted for this kind of government, wanted this kind of legislation. Do you object to the democratic process?
I object
almost
the idea that people have the right to vote.
Sorry, were we going to say something?
Yeah, the that everybody's enslaved to everybody reminds me of Brave New World, where everybody belongs to everybody else. So
yes, I didn't think about that actually on the first viewing. That's a good point.
And
it's almost exactly the same phrasing.
She, so yeah, is she wrong? I guess that back when this interview was taken, all the social programs were introduced, and well, if you take them to the logical conclusion, you have a lot of people who are dependent on the state. So I find it hard to argue against it. But then again, her alternative that she proposes is so harsh that I feel that she probably would belong better in Sparta or something, where they just discard all the children that are not fit enough.
Well, it's a rational thing to do.
Yes, it's very rational. So that's also why they come to the bank accounts of love and measuring virtue. And I mean, at some point they probably introduces some kind of virtue credit system where you can have somebody's virtue value, and there's a stock exchange for that. So yeah, I see how this maps to that kind of world. Be the Gordon Gekko of virtue.
This was, and this is the reason why Mike Wallace was interviewing Ayn Rand and also interviewing Aldous Huxley. This was the core discussion topic of the time, and there was a great deal of discussion about what should and shouldn't be done, and there were those who were led by logical, cold, calculated reasoning, and saying we can't afford this stuff, and it's not only can't we afford it, it's going to exacerbate the problems it's attempting to solve. And then there were a bunch of people who were more naive but more populous, again, because to counteract Rand's point, people don't think about this stuff. People are not rational creatures, as despite the core of rationality, or the core rationality has and holds within objectivism. People aren't rational creatures. In fact, the vast majority of people are more driven by their emotions and their situations than they are by any kind of approach to rational thought. Consequently, if you want to go into any sort of political motivation or political campaign, you appeal primarily to emotions and shared values. And one of the core shared values of this time period was the altruism, and that you are your brother's keeper, or that you have certain social responsibilities. And it was just accepted as a matter of course that one would attempt to take care of one's family and friends, and that the state was better at taking care of people than the individual, which we've now conclusively proven through experimentation not to be the case, but that was not necessarily known at the time.
Yes, yeah. And just bearing in mind, there's only a year between this interview and the one with Huxley, so they're sort of they're both tackling the same framework, the same time period, and obviously both had been writing quite a lot prior to the interviews, but there just seems to be a post-war malaise that all of these interviews are coming from, where, as we've said on numerous occasions, analysis might be great, but then the alternative solutions being provided, not so much.
On everything. The traditional American system was a system based on the idea that majority will prevailed only in public or political affairs, and that it was limited by inalienable individual rights. Therefore, I do not believe that a majority can vote a man's life or property or freedom away from him.
And that is one of the core components of originalism and judicial restraint and federalism, which has gone by the wayside. And that's, the whole FDR presidency and the court packing scheme, et cetera, and so on, is conclusive rejection of Rand's position here, whether it was constitutionally valid or not. Yeah,
I don't know. I agree that originalism would not have descended to the depths that America's sunk now, but it did seem to get subverted pretty damn quickly.
Oh, undoubtedly. I'm just pointing out that again, this is a premise that is been rejected, whether it's false or not. It was rejected by the American people a long time ago.
Yes, and I think that's to go back to some of the rhetoric being used here, that's kind of what Rand is appealing to, is the foundational myths of America. I think she sees them as fitting quite well into her framework, which, when it comes to her questioning of democracy is accurate, and it's something that has obviously come into the forefront now of people's minds for reasons that shan't be mentioned. Yeah, but again, this section, her analysis is pretty spot on.
Majority votes on any issue, that this makes the issue right. It doesn't.
All right. Then how do we arrive at action? How should we arrive at action?
By voluntary consent, voluntary cooperation of free men, unforced.
And how do our leaders arrive? How do we arrive at our leadership? Who elects? Who appoints?
The whole people elects. There is nothing wrong with the democratic process in politics. We arrive at it the way.
I found that the most surprising part of the interview. That she says that democracy is not, inherently against objectivism.
Well, this goes back to her premise, and one of the things that amuses me is when Rand often said, "If you find your conclusion faulty, check your premise."
Mm-hmm.
That was one of her core quotes: "Is check your premise."
Yeah.
And she needs to check her premise that man is a rational creature because it's false, and accepting that as true is what's causing all of this.
It feels like she's making a party for left-handed people. That the kind of people that she describes are in an inherent minority, so they will never win in a democratic process. So,
which is why they need a strong constitutional limitation on the democratic process in order to actually thrive, which is the core to which she was referring earlier, that there needs to be a restriction on what the people can vote away from other people.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Again, I agree that if no one's there to uphold it, as we've seen America, case in point, these things can't just be written in and then forgotten about. It needs to be lived. It needs to be a living constitution, not just a piece of paper.
Careful with your phrasing there, friend.
Yeah, so let's carry on with the video.
We arrived by the American Constitution as it used to be. By the constitutional process, as we had it, people elect officials, but the powers of those officials, the powers of government are strictly limited. They will have no right to initiate force or compulsion against any citizen except a criminal. Those who have initiated force will be punished by force, and that is the only proper function of government. What we would not permit is the government to initiate force against people who have hurt no one, who have not forced anyone. We would not give the government or the majority or any minority the right to take the life or the property of others. That was the original American system.
When you say take the property of others, I imagine that you're talking now about taxes.
Yes, I am.
And you believe that there should be no right by the government to tax. You believe that there should be no such thing as welfare legislation, unemployment compensation, regulation during times of stress, certain kinds of rent controls and things like that.
That's right. I'm opposed to all forms of control. I am for an absolute, laissez-faire, free, unregulated economy. Let me put it briefly. I'm for the separation of state and economics, just as we had separation of state and church, which led to peaceful coexistence among different religions after a period of religious wars. So the same applies to economics. If you separate the government from economics, if you do not regulate production and trade, you will have peaceful cooperation and harmony and justice among men.
You are certainly enough of a political scientist to know that certain movements spring up in reaction to other movements. The labor movement, for instance, certain social welfare legislation. This did not spring full-blown from somebody's head, out of a vacuum. This was a reaction to certain abuses that were going on. Isn't that true, Ayan?
Not always. It actually sprang up from the same source as the abuses. if by abuses you mean the legislation which originally had been established to help industrialists, which was already a breach of complete free enterprise. If then, in reaction, labor leaders get together to initiate legislation to help labor, that is only acting on the same principle, namely all parties agreeing that it is proper for the state to legislate in favor of one economic group or another. But what I'm saying is that nobody should have the right, neither employers nor employees, to use state compulsion and force.
But when you advocate completely unregulated economic life in which every man works for his own profit, you are asking, in a sense, for a devil take the hindmost, dog eat dog society, and one of the main government controls was to fight the.
Well, this is exactly echoing the argument that was made by good old Ernest in The Iron Heel.
Yes.
And the amusing part of it is that, as I stated at the time, and is gone over in The Myth of the Robber Barons book, the poorest performing corporations and industries at the time were the ones that were most tied in and protected by the government. The ones that were driving things forward were working very hard to try and make things better for their workers and for their processes, because they recognized and realized that a healthy, happy, productive worker provides much more value to the organization than someone who is barely trained, barely competent, and gets injured after a week.
Yes, and he actually uses the robber barons as an example in just a moment as well. You can kind of see when he's posing these questions to her why she's taken it to the extreme. If you were of her sort of temperament and mindset already, and this is 59, we're nowhere near down the slope yet. But she's gone from Russia to the US and seen what she feels is the slippery slope to socialism happening. You can understand why there was such a rejection of any form of socialism, and how she ultimately ended up with objectivism as an ideology.
Yeah, her position is thoroughly understandable and comprehensible, and in fact, it's very well reasoned. Again, assuming certain premises, which we've already established as being pretty much false.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to psychologize her and say that's purely why she came to it, but just the background of it, you can and the environment of the time, you can see where this idea sprang out of. Well,
if you read some of her works, I don't know if We the Living was one of her first books or not, but in that it's an allegory to the way she grew up in Russia.
Robber barons to fight laissez-faire, in which the very people whom you admire the most, the hard-headed industrialists, the successful men, perverted the use of their power. Is that not true?
No, it isn't.
Oh.
This country was made not by robber barons, but by independent men, by industrialists who succeeded on sheer ability.
And
by ability, I mean without political force, help, or compulsion. But at the same time, there were men, industrialists, who did use government power as a club to help them against competitors. They were the original collectivists. Today, the liberals believe that same compulsion should be used against the industrialists for the sake of workers. But the basic principle there is, should there be any compulsion? And the regulations are creating robber barons. They are creating capitalists with government help, which is the worst of all economic phenomena.
I think that you will agree with me when I say that you do not have a good deal of respect for the society in which you and I currently live. You think that we're going downhill fairly fast. Now, I would like you to think about this question, and you'll have a minute intermission to ponder it, and then come back and answer it. Do you predict dictatorship and economic disaster?
Were you going to make a point, sorry?
No, he's putting her in a certain corner. Like, yeah, you have no respect for the society, and I don't think that is true. I think she has respect for the society as in what it can achieve, but she has no respect for people who use collectivism in order to achieve their goals. She kind of rejects all forms of people pressuring other people into doing stuff. So I think that's a bit of a dishonest tactic of Mike Wallace here.
Yeah, I think she had a deep love of America as an idea. I think it's disingenuous for him to say you don't respect it.
I think she really loves the American dream, where every man, if he wills it, has a chance to become rich.
Yeah, it's a sort of homesteading man going out in the frontier and seizing his future. I think that's what attracts her so much about America.
For the United States, if we continue on our present course. Do you? And we'll get Ayn Rand's answer in just a moment. And now back to our story. All right, Ayn Rand, what I'd like to know is this. Since you describe it as happening in your novel Atlas Shrugged, do you actually predict dictatorship and economic disaster for the United States?
If the present collectivist trend continues, if the present anti-reason philosophy continues, yes, that is the way the country is going. But I do not believe in historical determinism, and I do not believe that people have to go that way. Men have the free will to choose and to think. If they...
A man chooses.
A slave obeys.
Had to be mentioned at some stage.
Change their thinking, we do not...
What was that, sorry?
No, it's just that we're going into Bioshock territory. So.
Yes, that could be a whole new conversation, which I'd love to have, but let's keep this.
The free will versus determinism thing is core to a lot of philosophies, and Rand is very strongly on the free will side of the fence, which again reaffirms the fact that her premises is flawed, because there are a lot of people who, while they have free will, they very rarely choose to exercise it.
Yes.
Yeah, there's comfort in having somebody else making the decisions for you for some people. But anyway, Albion, would you kindly continue?
I mean, regardless of whether or not she was being told to do it or not, I think she would hit Andrew Ryan over the face with a golf club. I think, I don't think anything would stop her.
Have to go into dictatorship.
Yes, but how can you expect to reverse this trend when, as we've said, the country is run by majority rule through ballot, and that majority seems to prefer to vote for this modified welfare state?
Oh, I don't believe that. You know as well as I do that the majority today has no choice.
What do you mean?
The majority has never been offered a choice, but...
Shock horror.
Well, no, we can keep going, because this is her answer is amusing.
Yes.
Between controls and freedom.
How do you account for the fact that an almost overwhelming majority of the people who are regarded as our leading...
By the audio hiccups are not on our end. It is the actual recording of the video. So,
intellectuals and our leading industrialists, the men whom you seem to admire the most, the men with the muscle and the money, favor the modified capitalism that we have today.
Because it is an intellectual issue. Since they all believe in collectivism, they do favor it. But the majority of the people has never been given a choice. You know that both parties today are for socialism, in effect, for controls, and there is no party. There are no voices to offer an actual pro-capitalist, let's say fair, economic freedom and individualism. That is what this country needs today.
Isn't it possible that we all believe in it because we are all basically lonely people and we all understand that we are basically our brother's keepers?
You couldn't say that you really understand it, because there is no way in which you could justify it. Nobody has ever given a reason why men should be their brother's keepers, and you've had every example, and you see the examples around you of men perishing by the attempt to be their brother's keepers.
You have no faith in anything.
Faith?
Only
No.
in your mind.
That is not faith. That is a conviction. Yes, I have no faith at all. I only hold convictions.
Who are you, Ayn Rand? When I say that, I would like to know just a little bit.
So let's pause here for a second, discuss her point about the masses and the choices and the democracy, because that's a very another core component and core failing in her understanding of human psychology and human nature. She's right in that most people haven't considered the position of, are we our brother's keeper and what does that all entail? But by that same token, she should also recognize that institutions are inherently in favor of control of the masses and in favor of controls on the masses. So they will, by their very nature, inculcate the masses over whom they have any influence to support expansion of their power.
It's the premise of Crisis in Leviathan, isn't it? Anything that comes about that allows the institution to seize power is going to take it. So why would you put on the ballot? Do you want to opt for us to have less power or more? You put on the ballot. Do you want us to have this power, or do you want us to have this power? Or you give them a gradient of saying, well, you can either allow us to have 30% more power or 50% more power.
The illusion of choice.
There's a misunderstanding of, well, I don't know if it's misunderstanding or if it's a bit of utopian thinking that the nature of institutions will ever be different.
Well, that goes back to, what are institutions? Mike Wallace references the robber barons of the time and the industrialists, but those are just the people at the top of the pyramid. The people who are actually making the decisions on what to advertise and what to support and what are politically expedient are the middle managers, are the people who are cross-pollinating between politics and that organization. In fact, the Rand herself recognizes this and references it in Atlas Shrugged. So the fact that she doesn't seem to carry that to its natural conclusion and recognize that the people at the levers of power of these organizations are the bureaucrats and not the industrialists, just identifies as who was the guy who wrote The Managerial Elite?
Burnham.
Yes,
Yep.
Burnham recognized this well before this was even an inkling. But Rand doesn't seem to understand that, or at least apply it to her question and her recommendation as to, or her recognition of what the masses want and what the masses would want in a certain situation. To Bishop's point about the illusion of choice, when you put something on the ballot, it's not phrased in that way. It's phrased in the way of, should such and such an organization be granted the authority to solve this problem? And when put in that context, most people are like, oh, so someone else is going to solve this problem? Great. Where do I sign up?
Yep.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Freelance?
Well, another thing that I've noticed here, and that's also the way that Brandy explained it, that the middle management are actually in control. She idolizes the industrialists, so the people who basically start industries and build stuff. But then she kind of forgets that once an industry is running, it's being optimized by the middle management, and she basically ignores that these exist. So her philosophy would kind of work if you have a upstart society. So you start from scratch and you have to build something new, a railway system or some steel industry or oil. And in that case, you would idolize the people who would start that. But once you have that system running and it needs to become more efficient and it starts competing, then you get this middle management layer. And I think that's basically her blind spot.
Yeah, well, it's the point I was making earlier that it's a one generational solution for an intergenerational problem. She idolizes the entrepreneur, but there's not a recognition of what follows after your Ford or after your Disney. They're not around forever, and what they build up falls into the hands of other people. I think
this short-sightedness is clearly evident in Atlas Shrugged, and in the culmination of the book, where I'm not going to spoil it for anybody, but the last third of the book is really the nascent building of a society that mirrors her theology, and it is a theology. It's not a philosophy.
Yeah,
but it doesn't address 20, 40, 60 years down the road.
Yeah. I mean, the rationalism that she describes, a rose of any other name, it all comes across exactly the same way. All right, let's carry on.
Russian. You were born in Russia?
Yes.
Came here?
Oh, about 30 years ago.
And whence did this philosophy of yours come?
Out of my own mind, with the sole acknowledgement of a debt to Aristotle, who is the only philosopher that ever influenced me. I devised the rest of my philosophy myself.
I find that almost impossible to believe.
Really? Why?
Yeah.
Well, maybe I just need to read more Aristotle, but there's a certain strain of stoicism that I see in her writing as well, that I would have thought would have influenced her. Epictetus, was it? Epictetus. I see that. I see a lot of that kind of. It's a self-improvement, and the. I mean, look at how she names the book, Atlas Shrugged. That sort of. If you're a slave, it's your own fault. Taking every decision, not only your decision, but every decision of everyone around you on your own shoulders. I don't know. There's a certain strain of stoicism that I see in objectivism.
Well, that's a rather significant misunderstanding of the terminology of Atlas Shrugged. So fundamentally, the meaning behind her choice for Atlas Shrugged is her assertion that the levers of power and the reason the world works is exclusively the domain of the rational man, and that in the absence of the rational man, society would collapse. So, rational man being Atlas, the rational man should shrug and let society attempt to deal with itself, to deal with reality itself without the assistance of the rational man. That's what Atlas Shrugged means, not the Epicurean approach to or the Epicurean or Stoic approach to shouldering the responsibility of the decisions of others.
Yes. No. Okay. Maybe I should reword it. Maybe the difference would be that the Stoic approach would be that you shoulder the burden of everyone else around you as well as your own. But obviously, for the objectivist, it's that. I still think the figure of Atlas works in the sense that you're taking on the responsibility of all of your own actions.
Well, yes, that's true. But the core component is Atlas. The core element of objectivism is Atlas doesn't know that he's supporting the world. He's supporting the world because that's the only way he can get what he wants done. Therefore, it's a matter of course that he has to do this, that, and the other thing. But
so my impression of it is that his shrugging it is a benefit to Atlas, and he shouldn't be burdened with the world.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the core comparison most people seem to make for Rand's philosophy is with Nietzsche.
Yeah. That was
which
the other
is
person I was going to move on to.
yeah, and it makes a lot of sense for some elements to compare her to Nietzsche. And apparently we lost Bishop for a bit. Hopefully he'll be back soon.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll be back on in a moment.
But the core component of Nietzschean thought is logical determinism and logical continuation. So it would make sense that there would be a mirroring of the conclusions Nietzsche reaches and the conclusions that Rand reach when they both apply a similar methodology, i.e. rationalism and materialism, to the problem of philosophy. It's just they're operating with different premises.
Well, and I also think that the concept of the Übermensch is sort of interchangeable with her idealization of the entrepreneur.
It is true, but in the Ford of the Fountainhead, she mentions she dislikes Nietzsche because she said, well, he was on the right track, but he ended up being some kind of dreamer. So she didn't see him as a complete person himself. So that's probably why she likes Aristotle more than Nietzsche.
Interesting. I find that a strange criticism, but I'd need to know.
Talking about Ayn Rand, so.
It was. No, I'd be curious as to why she thought that he was more of a dreamer than she is. I think on my little reading of both of them, I think Nietzsche has a better understanding of human nature than Rand. I would say he's less idealist, less utopian in a lot of his thinking. So for her to call him a dreamer, I'm surprised by. But maybe going to be hopping in and out. Maybe I'm just maybe I need to be more familiar with both of them to draw a proper comparison. But I find that surprising. Anyway, any other points to make, Freelance, whilst you're still in the land of the living?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
Your parents, did they die in Russia or did they come here to the United States?
No, I came here alone, and I don't know. I have no way of finding out whether they died or not.
You are married?
Yes.
Your husband, is he an industrialist?
No, he's an artist. His name is Frank O'Connor.
And he, not the writer?
He paints. Not the writer.
And does he live from his painting?
He's just beginning to study painting. He was a designer before.
Is he supported in his...
You can see on her smile that she understands what what hole he's trying to push her into.
And the kicker is that this is irreconcilable.
What is, sorry?
The hole into which he's pushing her. It's a fundamental irreconcilability with her philosophy. This is the problem, in a nutshell. Let's continue and find out what.
Yes, I'm interested to know what you mean by that.
Efforts by the state?
Most certainly not.
He's supported by you for the time being?
No, by his own work, actually, in the past.
Well, I know.
By me, if necessary, but that isn't quite necessary.
And there is no contradiction here, in that you help him.
No, because you see, I am in love with him selfishly. It is to my own interest to help him if he ever needed it. I would not call that a sacrifice because I take selfish pleasure in it.
Let me put one specific.
You see that's the kicker. You know, it's a illogical, irrational, emotional conclusion that she is wrapping in the selfish decision to achieve happiness by accepting. If you allow that, then literally everything becomes open again.
It becomes subjective.
Yes.
Yes, yeah, and that's what I mean. That's why she, at the very beginning, was trying to frame relationships in the transactional sense, because that is one of the biggest criticisms that can be labeled against her, is it falls apart when it comes to interrelations. Yeah, which is why I say that she has a misunderstanding of human nature.
Exactly. And this is also pointed out by the fact that later on in her life, she abandoned her husband and took on a different lover, whom she didn't marry.
Or 12.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just to confirm as well, she did not have any children. So, running theme.
So this is it. She's right about the selfishness part of it, but she's wrong about there being any outward virtue or morality being imposed on her definition of selfishness, which therefore grants the opportunity for someone to selfishly want to enslave other people because it makes them happy. And especially if those people who are being enslaved want to be slaves, or at least are happy in their slavery. Therefore, it provides a moral patina to the current society, wherein there's masses of people voting for their slavery and voting for which master they choose to serve.
Mm-hmm. Anything else, Bishop? Or should we
No, I agree with Brandy that this leads to an amoral society, because you can justify anything. You can have the and then say, well, I'm being oppressed. It's just, yeah, well, you just didn't gather enough slaves, or you didn't do. It's your own failure, that it's your own fault that you failed, and all the other stuff can be justified from a selfish pleasure. So. So yeah, I think Mike Wallace really cornered her here really well.
Yeah, but you can see that it slightly missed the mark when he thought that her husband would be sponging off the state, and she's like, "No, I support him," but he goes in for the same attack.
System of self-sufficiency. One single corporation were to get a stranglehold on a vital product or a raw material, uranium, for instance, which might be vital for the national defense, and then would refuse to sell it to the government. Then what?
Under a free system, no one could acquire a monopoly on anything. If you look at economics and economic history, you will discover that all monopolies have been established with government help, with the help of franchises, subsidies, or any kind of government privileges. In free competition, no one could corner the market on a needed product.
And this is perhaps the most confusing thing about objectivists, because I've never heard one wrong on the economic front. Mm-hmm. So they understand incentive structures, but then they apply it to morality and it all falls apart.
Well, they fail. Go ahead, Bishop.
No, I had a non-economic point to make, so let's keep on going about the economics.
Well, it's the entire point of was perfectly illustrated in your non-economic point. They don't approach anything from a non-economic perspective. They expect humans to be homo economicus,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
which is the same problem that the Chicago School has.
Yeah, no, that's spot on.
Yeah. Also, the way that she describes that in a free system, there's nothing stopping the Chinese uranium mining company getting a large foothold in the USA to mine all the uranium they need and export it.
Well, it's not only it's again that it's the complete and total lack of comprehension that there could possibly be non-economic value, or to put it in better terms, values that are not commoditized, that hold significant economic value and are recognized as such by actors. By that I mean there's an economic amount of value that the United States places on the strategic interest of having reliable access to uranium in this case.
So, do you think that objectivists fail to understand psychic profit.
Yes, absolutely. Which is, again, it's not that they fail to understand it, because as we take a look back at Rand's position on her relationship with the artist, she demonstrates through revealed preference that she understands and accepts psychic profit. But she refuses to extend that to the economic sphere as well.
Yeah.
So she's her revealed preference is she recognizes psychic profit in morality, but she refuses to recognize psychic profit in the economic realm.
Yeah. No, I think you're right on that. And it's funny that the same pitfall that objectivists in Chicago School have, because I just picture Rand and Milton Friedman having a conversation. I don't see it going down particularly well.
I don't think that was one of the things that, because they were relatively, I believe they were contemporaries.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I wonder if they could interact.
I don't think they ever actually interacted. I think they might have exchanged letters a couple times, but I don't think there was any significant interaction between the two of them.
Now suddenly getting flashbacks to the Fountainhead, between the way that Dominique Francon and Howard Rourke, the relationship between the public and the private they have.
Did she have an interaction with Rothbard?
Was it Rothbard?
I feel like there's definitely one of her contemporaries that was in economics.
It might have been Rothbard of whom I was thinking, and not Friedman.
That they had a massive falling out.
It was probably Rothbard.
I think it was Rothbard. Anyway, yeah. And
I should have read up on that before this, but because she's a very interesting character.
And she managed to garner quite a following of the elite at the time. I think this might be quite a good example of an elitist movement.
I'd almost say controlled opposition. Honestly.
Well, yeah, that's the question. Was it actually organic? But it's still an interesting period of interesting time period, and this idea just seemed to pop out of nowhere and then seize America for 10 years at least.
Are you pulling into dock now? Because it sounds like there's a foghorn going off to you, Albion.
Was that? Oh, sorry about that.
The Albion lives underneath the magic roundabout.
My cover's been blown. Right, let's go.
Rand is an interesting person, as in that she basically is the protagonist, or at least characters in her novel. She is that. So basically, she writes about herself, and so you instantly recognize that. So when you were mentioning that she had a spat with Rothbard, I would love to read that, because it probably makes a good novel by itself. Just her in a fight.
I'll play this next section and tell me when you want to pause it, but I'll quickly look up. I'm fairly certain she had a massive public falling out with Rothbard. Let me carry it on.
Say there is a deposit.
History will support me.
There is a deposit of uranium in Nevada. It's the only one in the United States, and it's our only access to that. And for self-defense, we need this. Whereas, let's say, in the Soviet Union, the state is able to command that. And a kind of a strange man of strange beliefs got hold of this uranium and said, I will not sell this uranium to my government. He should not be able to be forced by the government, according to your philosophy, to sell that uranium.
But you realize that you are setting up an impossible fantasy. That is, if you're talking of any natural resource that is vitally needed, it could not become vitally needed if it were that scarce. Not
False.
Scarce to the point where one man could control.
The reason I say it's false is this is demonstrably and conclusively proven true via the warm water port in Crimea and Russia's response to losing it. Having reliable access to the ocean for trade, etc., is one of those elements wherein there's a natural resource, i.e. the ocean, and some individual, or in this case, another country, could deny access to a second country, and it would be within their strategic necessity to regain access.
Or you could do strategic land buying and then ask ridiculous prices at the moment somebody wants to build a road.
Exactly.
In which case the government couldn't do anything, and you could ask for that just a single yard of land. You could ask millions and millions of dollars.
$1 trillion, please. Yeah, that is precisely the case for which eminent domain was made, and is the only morally justifiable case in which it would be defensible.
I was just going to say I found the disagreement. It was between Rand and Rothbard, and I think it was that he just felt that she was involved in the libertarian movement because she wanted to sleep around and do as many drugs as she could. I think he felt that she was coming from a position of she wants to get away with being a degenerate, so that's why she was attracted to libertarianism. But I think they had a bit of a friendly jab at each other, but that was his main criticism of her.
So it's exactly like like in her novels.
Yeah,
well,
he's not wrong.
Have you read Atlas Shrugged yet?
No, I actually have a life, but I will get to it at some point.
No, her main female protagonist in Atlas Shrugged is significantly different than her main female protagonist in Fountainhead.
Okay.
Yes, in interviews, she's admitted that she does identify with the main female protagonist in Fountainhead, Dominique, but she says that it's generally her on a bad day.
I would hope so.
Yeah. But she's clearly, if you actually read some of her writing, got some very interesting ideas on human relationships and male-female amorous activities, let's say.
Very nicely put.
Yeah, sometimes she feels like she's some kind of alien that has been dropped from another planet, and not just from another country, and that she basically misunderstands some aspects or has a really, really odd view of them. So it makes it fascinating to read, but it's not a manual by any means.
All of it. So long as, I'm using your example, if a natural resource exists in more than one place in the world, no one man is going to control it.
All right, let's take another. How do we build roads, sanitation facilities, hospitals, schools? If the government is not permitted to force, if you will, by vote, taxation, use your word, we have to depend upon the trickle-down theory, upon the noblesse oblige, the largesse.
I will answer you by asking you a question. Who pays for all those things?
All of us pay for these things.
When you admit that you want to take money by force from someone and ask me, how are we going to build hospitals or roads? You admit that someone is producing the money, the wealth that will make those roads possible. Now you have no right to tell the man who produced the wealth in what way you want him to spend it. If you need his money, you can obtain it only by his voluntary consent.
And you believe in the eventual goodwill of all human beings, or at least that top echelon of human beings whom you believe will give willingly.
No goodwill is necessary, only self-interest. I believe in private roads, private post offices, private schools.
When industry breaks down momentarily and there is unemployment, mass unemployment, we should not be permitted to get unemployment insurance. Social security we do not need. Will depend upon the self-interest of these enlightened industrialists whom you so admire to take care of things when the economy needs a little lubrication and there are millions of people out of work.
study economics.
I mean, we won't go into this because I think her takedown of that argument is actually better than one I could put forward.
A free economy will not break down. All depressions are caused by government interference. And the cure is always offered so far to take more of the poisons that cause the disaster. Depressions are not a result of a free economy.
And one last question. We only have about a half a minute. How many Randists, you don't like the word, I beg your pardon.
Objectivists.
How many objectivists would you say there are in the United States?
It's hard to estimate, but I can tell you some figures. My best intellectual, Nathaniel Brandon, a young psychologist, is giving a series of lectures on my philosophy in New York. He has received 600 letters of inquiry within the month of January. He's giving these lectures, and the attendance is growing in geometrical proportion.
Ayan, I'm sure that you have stimulated a good many people, more people than already have, to read your book, Atlas Shrugged, and The Fountainhead. And I'm equally sure they will be stimulated for the reading, indeed, if they do not agree.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll be back in a moment with my personal footnote to the story of Ayn Rand. As we said at the outset, if Ayn Rand's ideas were ever to take hold, they would revolutionize the world. And to those who would reject her philosophy, Miss Rand hurls this challenge. She has said, for the past 2,000 years, the world has been dominated by other philosophies. Look around you. Consider the results. We thank Ayn Rand for adding her portrait to our gallery, one of the people other people are interested in. Mike Wallace, goodbye.
In which other people are interested.
Yes, a little casual backhanded remark there.
Well,
So,
no,
yeah.
no, I was correcting his grammar.
Oh, sorry. I still
never
think it's a little bit of an insult. I understand it's the name of the series, but
I think it sounds differently back in the day.
look at the size of the lav mics back then as well.
Well, I'm just impressed they were able to get something like that was basically man portable. You know.
No,
the audio quality was actually quite good.
Especially compared to the Huxley one. I think it's massively improved. But then it could have just been a poor recording of that one.
The video was garbage, but
yeah. Right. Well, any final thoughts? I don't think there's anything else on the
Rand
video.
For adding her portrait to our gallery, one of the
Just some static and a very awkward interaction between the two of them. Although straight away she's moved in. You can see once the questioning stopped, they're engaging much more friendly. Anyway,
Yeah, I wonder what she was like if it wasn't such an adversarial discussion.
Yeah, I can picture that she behind closed doors she was quite a fun character actually when she didn't have a backup.
My understanding of her personality was she was very engaging as long as you agree with her, and if you didn't agree with her, she was very aggressive and adversarial.
Mm-hmm.
So take that and do with it as you will.
So she would need a group around her of people she despised, the sheep.
Yes. She required admirers, or rather, she worked best amongst admirers.
Yeah, she's the type of person I think that attracts a cult of personality. That because it's a sort of a dissident position, the people that get on board with her really get on board, and so I think she could attract a sort of yes men crowd.
And on that note, it wouldn't surprise me if in our interactions with objectivists, if we have any, they found out about our criticisms, it would be downhill from there.
I mean, they're more than welcome to jump on in a future stream if they think that we've been unfair. I think that we've been completely
I'm
objective,
interested,
so to speak, with our engagement.
I'm really interested in their objective opinions.
I'm really interested in talking to two objectivists that disagree.
Oh, that's impossible because they're clearly objective.
Yes.
Right, enough throwing shade. We've had Rupert just pop a question in the chat as well. Do any of you know if her ideas were more popular then or now? I suspect now, but I don't know. I mean, it was a movement back then, whereas now I think some of the ideas are probably propagated more, but as an actual movement, as I say, she was a bit of a cult of personality. So
I think if you would ask the average person, like on the street, the chance that they would know who she is would be greater back then because she was alive and she was being interviewed. Nowadays, if you mention her books, then most people don't know what you're talking about. So I think that as a movement centered around her, it was definitely stronger back then. If you would say, well, that the idea of objectivism is stronger now, then I don't know, because kind of modern psychology has proven it wrong. It's impossible to be objective.
Mm-hmm.
So
I would say that as a political movement, she was much more powerful then. In fact, it's pretty much conclusively proven because she was on CBS with Mike Wallace or whatever network that was.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, there's no real engagement with the objectivists in any kind of a mainstream mechanism.
Yeah.
She was also active in politics at the time. But in terms of absolute numbers, I would say that she's much more powerful now because the internet has broadened her appeal and provided opportunities for interested individuals around the world to engage with her ideas. And there's also been, I was just going to also say in fact, the from where we got this, the ARI, the Ayan Rand Institute, has also grown, and then there's some other objectivist groups that are carrying on evangelizing and propagating objectivism.
Yeah, so I was just going to say that the person that always comes to mind is Yaron Brook, is the guy that really holds the flame for Randian objectivism nowadays, which I think he does seem to have support. I mean, he's a good talker. I think he probably, I don't know, he doesn't have the same sort of, like I say, cult of personality appeal as Rand does. And obviously, being the originator of the ideas, she has a certain mystique about her. But Yaron Brook is alive and kicking, and so I don't know. I would say it's still not as. I would say it was probably more popular back then because it was tied into so many other things. It was this new vibrant movement. It was not just a political or philosophical movement. You had art styles tied into the movement. It was a bit more of a complete package. So I think that people probably got stuck into it a bit more. Whereas now it's, I'll watch a Yaron Brook speech and then say, oh, okay, great idea, and then forget about it.
Well, also there was a schism within her, within the objectivist circles, between groups who wanted to take her ideas after her death and expand upon them and continue on in philosophical thought, and another group that said basically, nope, this is it. Objectivism is Ayn Rand's thing, and until and unless Ayn Rand comes back from the dead and starts continuing to add to it, that's it. So I don't remember which group is which, but yeah. So there's that.
Objectively, they should be the same, right?
We can't get away with just putting objective into every sentence and taking the mick.
I object. We certainly can.
Right. No, calling it a day.
Objection.
Overruled. End of stream.
Bye.
no, Rupert's just put one more thing. Yaron does also have the similar disposition of being a much better talker when you agree with him. Yeah, so yeah, or neutral as well. Well, he's much more amicable, but I don't know. There's a certain, like I say, there's an appeal to someone like Rand in her being a firebrand, and it's like the yes Chad face that I put on after that conversation. Yaron Brook would not just say after Mike Wallace intentionally set her up to seem negative by saying, well, you completely disagree with all of the institutions, and the entire idea of America. Yaron Brook would be much more careful.
He'd immediately reframe the question.
Yeah, he'd be much more careful to answer it and reframe the question. Whereas you've got someone like Rand who's just slam in and say yes. So, I don't know. He's a better talker in the way that he's more amicable and more careful at answering questions, but you attract a different audience depending on the speaking style, I think.
Greg Salameri is also in that same group, and he is very in the Randian mold of if you agree with me, I like you. If you disagree with me, you're the devil.
I'm not familiar with him. What was his name, sorry?
Greg Salameri, I think that's his name.
I'm not sure.
He's their resident philosopher in Cheap or something.
Maybe we should look at him at some stage and see if he adds anything.
SLMIERI, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah. Gregory Salmieri, SALMIERI.
Okay, let's wrap up, and I'll take a look at him. Otherwise, I'm just going to be sat here googling. Right. Okay. I thought that was a good stream, and like I say, I think that we were pretty fair to Rand.
I just want to say that I'm not trashing objectivists or objectivism as harshly as it would seem from my criticisms of it. I agree with a lot of their perspectives and a lot of their analyses and a lot of their economics, and for that matter, a lot of their philosophical underpinnings.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I have some strong questions about their fundamental basis for morality that I don't think are addressed at all, let alone well, within the objectivist school of thought.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that.
Yeah, if I can strawman it in some way, I think that their assumption of the existence of the Homo economicus, so the economic human, solely based on transactions and on value assessments, is wrong on objective value assessments.
Yeah, and that flaw, that assumption is so key to so many of the arguments put forwards that unfortunately it does to me take out the keystone, and everything else kind of falls apart. But a lot of their other analysis that doesn't revolve around Homo economicus is pretty accurate. Okay, well, let's wrap up and say goodbye. And next Sunday, we'll be taking another look at Iron Heel. So,
oh dear.
Yeah, let's call it a day.
Take care. Good afternoon, everybody.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.